My name is Michael Goldberg, and I'm an associate professor in our the Weatherhead School of Management, and also the executive director of our Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship on campus. And we're thrilled to also be partnering with Professor Lena and her students as part of her entrepreneurship course. And today's moderator, Hamza, we were just catching up before, is a master's student who's originally from India and been in the U.S. For just a short amount of time, but we're so thrilled to have her on campus and be moderating the session. I will go on mute, and Doug, my colleague, will be here and helping Hamza coordinate sessions. These sessions are best when everybody's asking questions, so we really want to hear from you and save your best, hardest questions for Julie. We'll put her on the spot and really look forward to the conversation. So with that, Julie, thanks for doing this, and Hamza, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Michael. So first of all, I would like to welcome Julie today for today's session. Thank you so much for joining in today. So as Michael has given it a very good intro, and we now know how well you guys know each other. So I just thought I can proceed further with the session today. First of all, with our prior interaction before I just start, I had a couple of questions in mind that I really wanted to discuss with you. And I hope my classmates and the other students would also be benefited by these. But most importantly, I would like to encourage everyone to ask some questions so that, it keeps the conversation going on. So first, we all know that you're a grad student from healthcare and operations. So what do you think would be a most important quality or an asset which a healthcare manager should possess in the work environment?
So, so first of all, great to be with everybody today. I hope I can be helpful in expanding your thinking and contributing to whatever you might be thinking about educationally or professionally. And thanks, Michael, for having me, and for everyone else who's put work into this. So it's a great question. And I would say that when I've worked a lot over the last decade with leaders in the industry. So I look at this question through the lens of what it takes to be a great leader in healthcare. And no matter where you are in your career, starting to really embody the characteristics that get you there or get you to where you want to go, right? That's not always necessarily to the top. And in healthcare in particular, I would say a few things. One is certainly empathy, and that empathy is for the people like us who end up being members or patients or the like, and empathy for those who are providing care. And I say that mostly because coming from the operations lens, I hope that we're doing more and more every day, especially now with the pandemic, to actually operate our care provision better. Think about how we provide care in ways that are more user-friendly to all of us. So you have to be empathetic and really understand the complexities that are dealt with on the front lines today, and how to think in a really forward-thinking, innovative way about how to make that experience better.
Thank you. So, that gives us a detailed insight. So how would you say from your personal experience, how have you developed these qualities right from the scratch, like from being a fresher to an entrepreneur now? How would you say the transition journey? Like, how would you describe, how has these qualities improved, and rather, you would have definitely developed them on a higher scale. So how do you recommend that?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I really, early in my career, I was wondering whether I should go back to school and go get my doctorate or go get a clinical degree. And I met Michael when I was in business school, so took a pretty different path. But part of the reason I did that was, first of all, organic chemistry killed me. But second, I had the opportunity early in my consulting career to work inside the belly of the beast of health systems. And there's nothing more humbling than really seeing how care is provided, how many people are involved in the process, how much technology is used, how the place functions, honestly. So that provider experience really helped me understand how to use that as a jumping off point. And I, had a somewhat meandering career in the sense that I've been trying to look at how can I have the biggest impact on fixing the system? Where can I contribute? So that's been my North Star as, I guess, an executive, you could say. And along the way, I looked at it through the lens. I've wanted to learn, how does policy work? And what role does policy really play? How does philanthropy work? Part of my career was starting a consulting firm focused only on philanthropic organizations to try to get them to think about how they use their money more strategically. And what I learned actually is philanthropy does amazing work, but it's never very strategic, nor does it ever scale, which might be why I'm back in business today. So I've been on the business side of healthcare the entire time. And for me, it's really been about learning different ways in which major stakeholders who either have a lot of money or a lot of power play in the environment, to try to really build those characteristics of empathy and kind of solution orientation. Is that helpful, Hamza?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So just adding on to that question, like you were saying that you had a doubt that whether you wanted to continue with your PhD and so on and get into research. So how would you think, like if you had taken that choice, how do you think you would have, do you think that it would have been even more better, or it would have changed your line of action, or how do you think that would have impacted your career?
I think that there's a lot of personal choice in this answer, to be honest. I have a number of friends who are MDs who have, and I'm sure you all may know someone like this, who have rolled out of practicing care and into some sort of business side of the industry. And I think it's a very tough decision for someone who has spent so much time pursuing a clinical degree. And I think you either love the human interaction of health, and you either love that human interaction of health because you love the science of it, or you want to figure out how do we actually get ourselves out of this acute care system and into a more preventative system. And that pulls you back, unfortunately, into, gosh, what are solutions here? So I think I probably, I'm not so sure how it would have changed my path, except for the fact that there's a tremendous amount of good that can be done at the clinical side. And there's nothing more important right now as a realization from the pandemic than the need for research, and research in very different ways, and the fusion of public health and the healthcare system, right? If we learned anything in the last year, it's about our downfall there. I think it really is about whether you want that human interaction in the care setting, or you want to be focusing on thinking about how to impact a lot of people, but not, quite so one-on-one.
That's nice. So we have a question from Rachel. So she has asked, can Julie tell us more about what she does in healthcare? What is her background, and how did she get where is she now?
It's a very good question. I'm sorry I didn't start there. So, as I spoke to earlier, my career has really been one where I've been trying to focus on how do I make the biggest impact. And so today I'm a partner at an investment firm called Transformation Capital. And Transformation is in its second fund, $500 million, focused exclusively on digital health innovation. So everything we invest in has to have some sort of technology at its core, and needs to be at a company that's actually trying to push the market towards more of a fee for value place, and not just continuing to support the fee for service environment. That being said, because we're investors, we have to time that market right. So some of this is incremental, and some of it can actually be game changing. So how did I get here? The meandering way I took was I started off as a consultant, which puts you in a very kind of generalist category and gives you a perch to see multiple things, not just super functional. I did that before and after going back to business school. And then I jumped into a small innovative company, about 100 to 150 employees, and tried to really use data, this very early days of using data to improve quality of healthcare. So what AI does today, we had a bunch of humans and a database that did 20 years ago, way ahead of our time. What I learned there was that small companies that are ahead of their time have a very hard time changing huge instantiated industries. But we're seeing the convergence of some of that happening now. But I took that experience and started a consulting firm of my own, focused on philanthropy. I already talked about what I think about philanthropy's contribution, which is fantastic, which set me down the road of policy to try to figure out, could policy be a place I could contribute here? How does that work? And I spent time, I was very fortunate to spend time in DC as the stimulus package was being passed and as the ACA was having its run up. And the firm I was a managing director for, much like many firms in DC, did a lot of work to infuse language into some of those bills. So I saw how all that worked. And what I decided was that I don't have the personality or the patience or the, frankly, interest in reading 800 pages of legislation and trying to interpret them. Like, I just can't do that. I'm a people person and I like to talk about the big vision. So the beauty of me in that role was once we had all the policy folks who translated all that stuff, I would then come in with my team and look at, what are the business implications for the pharma industry, for health plans, for health systems, et cetera. And that was an incredible learning experience to really understand where policy stops and where the market takes over. And my next step after that will then make the rest of the story make sense. I then joined a private equity firm that was focused on healthcare as well, although a little bit broader, and really saw how capital can make an enormous difference. But you either need to be working for a huge firm or you need a lot of firms on the same page about certain things. That's not sort of how capital typically plays. But I ended up inheriting this conference that was billed to me to be a CEO conference. And I piled on and I basically built a conference business within this private equity firm that ended up actually being quite successful. So we ended up spinning it out as a separate business. And I spent my last decade building relationships with CEOs and C-suites of the largest health systems, largest and most innovative, I'll say, health systems, health plans, pharma companies, and government officials as well as the CEOs only, there's a reason for this, of the innovative companies that are really changing the game. Some are disrupting, some are just helping advance the industry. And my whole vision was, if we can facilitate strategic collisions, if we can put the right types of people together and get the right relationships going across health plans, health systems, pharma. Now remember, healthcare loves its silos. Like, we'll do anything to just live within our silo of comfort. So I tried to break that in our environment. And we had a number of transactions, partnerships, and relationships that came out of that decade of work, and really was the premier convening of that level of executives. So I'm now taking that back to a capital platform and trying to look at unique ways we can, not just with our own fund, use those relationships, but develop a cross-fund platform to, frankly, try to drive more diversity of every type through our companies and other companies. And also drive really forward thinking about where the industry needs to be, but nowhere where any investor is really putting money today outside of some kind of wealthy seed folks, to really try to make the industry better through these companies, these small companies that are growing and making an impact in the huge incumbent industry. So I'll stop there because I've spoken for a long time, but for me, these different platforms play different roles, and I've learned so much in that approach. And if there's anything I would say to you, something very early to think about in your career is whether you want to be a generalist or a specialist. And if you look at the story I just told you, I have put myself in the position of being a generalist at every point along the way. And I've been fortunate, and I've just been in some pretty interesting positions to be able to develop some of what I've done. But I also have plenty of friends and colleagues who are just rocking the specialist roles. You know, they're incredible operators of all sorts of different healthcare companies. They're doing incredible like medical work as CMOs, or even data science work, which requires a lot of scientific understanding of healthcare, frankly. So there's a lot of ways to think about, you know, where you want to be. And I think that specialist versus generalist question is something you should keep in mind at every point that you're making a decision about your career. Because it's hard to be a generalist and actually then go back and be a specialist. That's sort of the point.
I just had a follow-up question to what you said. I was wondering why you only work with CEOs. You made a mention of saying that you only interact with them.
Great question. So the goal was to, you know, there are plenty, this is really a conference business question, to be honest with you, strategy question. There are plenty of conferences out there. I mean, there used to be about 1 million conferences for managers and below, salespeople. They become big parties where people go spend time and, you know, get a lot of work done. And what I tried to create was really something where the leaders got together, because I felt like if you can get that level of CEO and C-suite together who are decision makers, who take the long view, and need to drive the direction of the entire organization, you could do something powerful by bringing those folks together. And the only reason the CEOs of the small companies were there was because, you know, these small companies, you're not going to keep the large companies around very long if you have everybody from the small companies there. It's really only the CEOs who can potentially even convince a health system to buy their product. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
Next, we have Mark with a question he wants to ask you. Mark, you may unmute yourself and go ahead with your question.
Sorry. Hi, Julie from Washington, D.C. So as one of those D.C. people who was doing policy and advocacy work, both domestically and globally, in the private and public sector, and with NGOs internationally as well, I wanted to ask you from a different point of view, how can consumers and advocates, as well as policymakers, better engage with the entrepreneurial sector to forge alliances and partnerships to some of these emerging streams of doing business that we're talking about, that you've worked on for so long? Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a great question, Mark, because it's a part that's a little bit broken at the moment. I'm on the board of NCQA, and part of my role there has been to really try to encourage them to bring as many of the entrepreneurial companies into the work groups that they run around quality, or some of the new areas that they're exploring, because even NCQA, well, I shouldn't say even, NCQA falls in the trap of only working with the big plans and the big providers. So first, I think a lot of associations in DC would benefit by engaging leaders in some of these innovative categories, because I think they're doing things out there in the field that are not always top of mind or known in some of those associations. You know, policymakers, it's a complicated thing. I've seen, you know, under the Obama days with Anish Chopra and Todd Park and some of those folks who are working in the White House and HHS, they did a great job of really leaving the door wide open for entrepreneurs to come in and educate them. And policymakers, those particular policymakers, also did a lot to push data out of the government so that entrepreneurs could actually really use the data, learn from the data, make their products better, or even create products based on the fact that now CMS makes a lot of data available on its membership, right? In the right ways, of course. So I think exposing data and embracing entrepreneurs is something that we should be continually doing. And I think if you look at healthcare.gov and how that got fixed, it was fixed by embracing a lot of Googlers, right? That's pretty much the bottom line. So we know there's a lot of talent out there in the hinterlands and we need to take advantage of it. I'll just end on consumers is the tough one, to be honest. I have felt for a number of years that consumer presence is there in so many types, AARP, National Women's and Children's, or whatever that group is called. But it doesn't feel authentic necessarily in the way that it engages on behalf of the consumer. So there could be a lot more done by some of those organizations. Like AARP used to run an innovation lab that I think was actually really effective. It got companies to focus on seniors. And many of those companies had never focused on seniors before. And companies were literally started because AARP brought visibility to their population, to their segment. So perhaps that's the way to be thinking about it. I don't know if it's an innovation group like that, but it's bringing visibility to populations. I think if healthcare is at any turning point right now, it's at many. But one that's really important, Mark, to your question is healthcare is starting to segment populations in discrete ways where we can actually really take action, where policy can be developed, where companies can be created and scaled, and where solutions can actually meet where consumers are. And we haven't been there for a long time, ever.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Just very briefly, this begs the question for me personally. I'm looking to move into working with foundations and philanthropic organizations. But what role do and what are the successful, besides the Gates Foundation, for instance, foundations that are engaging in this, and how might they fill some of that void with consumers too?
Yeah, so one of my favorite foundations, which is not an enormous foundation, but I think has a pretty interesting model, is the California Healthcare Foundation. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah.
So what I've really appreciated about CHCF is that they have developed programmatic areas that are linked from what's the policy position and advocacy platform to what's the work in the field that can get funded to really demonstrate to, they've also been running an innovation fund for the last 10 years that tries to attract companies that may or may not be working in the Medicaid and underserved populations and giving them, some sort of financial transaction, whether it's a loan or some very free money. If you're a company and you're looking at equity or CHCF money is very easy. It's not going to dilute your ownership in a company. And they've gotten a lot of companies to actually come in and work with safety net organizations. They'll also grant the safety net organization so that they're, the safety net organization and the innovator are aligned in the work that they're doing. And then that innovator is creating a solution out of that can scale to far more people outside of California, potentially to others in the Medicare population to the extent that there's relationship, right? So I like that model, and I'm not seeing a ton of other foundations be that progressive.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks for being with us.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Mark. So anyone else have any questions? Like, do you have anything to ask?
I'm curious how many of you are on the biology side versus the business side. Is there kind of a science?
Science.
Okay.
I think the majority of us here are.
And how are you looking at what's happening with shifts in research and design and kind of commercialization with the pandemic and what's been accomplished? Because we're seeing, from the transformation capital perspective, we're seeing a resurgence of the use of digital tools in ways that have been talked about in life science for a long time, but uses of AI that have really gotten us where we are on vaccines and just new creative thinking about how to reach people with technology tools to get vaccines and arms and things like that. That the life science companies are doing. It's not all, not all the government, as we've seen. does any of that interest you, or is it worth discussing in any way?
Before that, we just have a question from Dr. Chakravarti.
I'm looking for some kind of a suggestion. I'm just basically a scientist and now turned into a teacher, basically. I worked in the pharmaceutical companies for 10 years, startup companies, but I don't have any skill in business. Would you please give some suggestions to these young people who want to continue in entrepreneurship based on your experience?
Sure. And I'm trying to think about where the best place would be to start. First I would say, I don't know if this is too basic, but the importance of internships and experience, it's unmatched. And the ability to try to get some practical experience in what you're studying, I think is so important. You've found people who have jumped ship from what they were studying because they felt like their practical experience was not actually what fed their soul. So, I think that's really important. When I think about entrepreneurial experience, Lena, let me ask you a question. Do you look at that question as how do you assess companies to join? How do you think about if you're a scientist looking to start a company? What's the right framing there for me to think about?
What are the question I'm looking for? If you can suggest some cons and pros, what they should do, what they should not do based on your experience. That's what I'm looking for.
As entrepreneurs.
As entrepreneurs, because they're going to face God knows what hurdles, nobody knows, right? But there is some basic norms, some basic pillars they should follow. That's what I'm looking for. Do you have any experience or any kind of advice?
Yeah, so let me try to frame it in an experience that I had. I, for a handful of years, sat on the UCSF kind of clinical transformation group where they were trying to commercialize solutions out of UCSF. And there were a handful of us from many different backgrounds, clinical, business, finance, et cetera, who would look at applications to this program. This program would give money to a researcher or a duo of some sort to help them figure out if they can develop this into a concept that can get scaled in some way or commercialized as a business. Mm-hmm. And what I saw there was that there were a lot of amazing ideas that came from the bowels of UCSF, right? So this is where care is happening. And a lot of those ideas were already commercial ideas. So the first thing to know is there's a lot going on out there. Mm-hmm. So if you have an idea and you're trying to patent it or develop some sort of IP or asset around it, it's so critical to really try to understand how to landscape the industry or what resources might be available to you to quickly understand if there are people like me, collect a few people like me who have access to what's happening with companies out there. It can save you a lot of time in either deciding that your idea shouldn't be pursued or in really tailoring it to something that's quite differentiated in the market and not like what's already out there. The second thing I would say is, beware of what you give away as you start to really look at developing a venture. It's, the best companies have never been invested in as with institutional investment, because we as investors do take a chunk of equity for giving you money. So if you really thinking through what the business model is and what the business model scenarios could be, and working with some folks who you might know from the business school or others in your life who are business oriented, really important to get some of that knowledge base in, so you understand how to approach that. Mm-hmm. Third, I would just say it is a lot of work. I mean,
for sure,
starting these companies, it's hard. And there's this line that I see all the time in our business with companies that have multiple founders that then really get down to the founder who's kind of making it all happen. There might be two. The political issues that are created when you have a couple founders and one becomes a CEO and one becomes something else, and how you live through that. Knowing how far you can get that company. I've seen founders take a company all the way to a huge public company. Most founders really need to step out of their business at some point and let more of the professional business operator come in to really scale that company. And what it's about is not necessarily a skill set or the ability to learn. It's about timing the market. If you have something that actually really has product proof of concept and you could actually scale it, you need to scale as fast as you can to really get that to the market. So this thinking will probably be a little bit more on the digital technology side than it is on the scientific side, right? And I recognize that. Right. But I think for an entrepreneurial venture, it's all about timing the market, which I think is, it's true of creating a molecule or creating other assets that are not necessarily just your traditional company. Is that helpful, Lena? Do you think?
Yeah. Thank you.
So I would like to just add one small part to Dr. Chakravarti's question. So you spoke about from the entrepreneurship side and as well as the research side. So as a CEO of the company, what skills or how would you look at your employees, like in the sense, what qualities must they possess or what assets must they possess in order to be a better leader in the future?
Great question. So, every leader needs to have their North Star, decide what is important to you and what you really need to accomplish, and always measure up every decision you make to what that North Star really is. I've already talked about empathy, and that absolutely is a characteristic for leaders. I think we're learning a lot over the last couple of years about the importance of transparency, and leaders who can be very transparent, even if news is bad. How you can really be a good communicator. And I think authenticity as well. We're finding a lot of leaders today who are really able to help their companies through these very challenging times because they're sharing personal stories. They're sharing personal stories about COVID or about racism or just about their own vulnerabilities. I'm starting a article series right now on female leaders and what we can learn from, and this is not just about female, I think any type of diversity that's not necessarily white male is what I'm going after here. What we're seeing from leaders in this period of time around COVID is going to be very indicative to how we see leadership over the course of the next decade. And the vulnerability is the part that I've been most kind of struck by in my interviews of female leaders so far. So, I think it's what I would say to that is 20 to 30 years ago, we would have said, oh, those are all very female skills. Those are the soft skills. Those aren't the hard skills about how to operate and how to, manage the finances and Those aren't the metrics. Those aren't the KPIs. I think at the end of the day, we're finally seeing this mix of a respect for the fact that you need an array of skills, but you also have to understand who you are, right? So the most important thing I think a leader can be is humble to understand who they are and recognize that if you can have a rock star compliment to somebody on your team who might intimidate you because they know more than you, but is your best partner ever because they make you and the company better because of their being there. That's the kind of leader that is going to really make success. And I'm seeing fewer and fewer of the top down, my way or the highway leaders get the respect that they used to get.
Absolutely right. I agree with you.
Yeah, thanks for that answer, Julie. And I would also like to ask you, like you were talking about some of your article series, right? Have you, do you have any previous articles or some resources which you can share it with all of us?
I do have I can share a couple articles with you. I'm sorry, I should have done that before. Maybe we can do that right after this.
Sure.
And I can share a couple titles of books that we shared. One of the things I started at Health Evolution, which is my last decade, couple of things that are indicative just to get you to think about how to use leadership advisory, if you will. We started a women's event called the Confab that was adjacent to our main event that was not just for women. It was for women and men to look at very classic issues through the lens of women and how they dealt with them. Very instructive for the men who came. Like I got incredible feedback in ways that made me realize that this is not just how we're putting together health plans, pharma companies, and health systems all in one room. It's about how we're putting together different types of leaders and actually putting them in situations where they learn from each other. We also started a leadership institute and was a year-round program that pulled together kind of those who were on their way to being CEO, who were recommended by their CEO. So I could pull some books and articles from that. I guess Doug and Hamza, if you'd be willing to do a little circulation. But a lot of what we talked about in that group was also the importance of things like journaling. It felt very fluffy at the time when we went down this road, to be honest. But we really structured the journaling in a way that was really about these leadership characteristics, about where they wanted to be, about their retirement speech. What do they want that to look like? And how can that really help shape how you actually plan your career? I mean, there's nothing like thinking through your retirement speech to discipline you around what you want to be known for and what's important to you. So those kinds of activities I think were really useful. The other thing I'll say is the next article I'm about to publish is on CEO of Christiana Care in Wilmington, Delaware. Her name is Janice Nevin. She's incredible. And the one thing that Janice said, I asked her about, how did you cope personally with all that your organization's been through? Her organization, first of all, that's where Biden got his vaccines, but they're a level 1 trauma center, and they basically built, a 180-bed hospital within their hospital to just deal with COVID. She was very forward thinking about how to really segment what was needed operationally within her organization, and tons of frontline trauma and community trauma. The number one thing she said that really got her through was her playlist, her song list, and I'll be publishing what her song list is. And she shares her playlist with her entire executive team, and it gets written about in some of their newsletters and things like that. So what I love about that is that here is a leader who's willing to kind of expose her personal song choices. Like, your music taste can say a lot about you in a way that's very exposing. So I'd encourage you to think beyond just the structured article and book reading, and also to really look at what's driving human beings in their ability to actually lead and build companies and the like. I mean, there's nothing scarier than trying to figure out how, going back to the entrepreneur question, how are you going to make money doing what you want to do? Like, where does that money come from? The most important thing I've always asked entrepreneurs for years is, okay, so who pays you for this? How are you going to get paid? And after you deplete as much of that market as you can, in other words, you sell into as many, let's just call them pharma companies as you can, what's your next customer? Who is the next group who's going to pay you? And that's something that's really important to think about in entrepreneurship, because it's so fun to think about companies you can build. but you need to get paid.
Well said. That's a very, very important. I would rather say an entrepreneur never gets paid, whereas the employees get paid a lot.
So that's one way I think.
Yeah. So, from your experience, so you have definitely had a wonderful experience. What do you think would be a personal insight which you would recommend to us who are planning or who may plan to become an entrepreneur in the future, but something which you would strongly say, you know what, this is, if you just remember this, you're going to be for sure in the right path.
Well, I'm going to have to go back to I'm going to say two things, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
The less inspirational thing, I'll try to end on the inspiration. The less inspirational thing is when you're embarking on some sort of entrepreneurial venture, it's very easy to, first of all, you have to be scrappy, right? It's very easy to build in ways that are not sustainable. So one of the best things you can be thinking about as a company of one or a company of 3 or a company of 10 is when and how do we build infrastructure? How do, the number of companies I see that are small companies that use Salesforce, I should not get into specific technologies here, but there's a ton of like cheaper CRMs out there you can use. So, and these boring technologies are critical to your business. So just thinking about infrastructure along the way is really important. That's not the answer to your question, but I just want to get that in there. The answer to your question, though, really, I think is this North Star issue, which is like, what mission are you on? And that, keeping that and holding that and knowing that when the world goes south and we have a huge crisis like we have had, that what your mission is. And there might be an entirely new way to get to that mission because of the way the world around you has changed. So holding to your North Star and paying attention to the world around you will get you where you need to go.
Thank you. That's, definitely it's going to be an inspiration for all of us over here, I guess. And so one last question before we end the session. So what do you think the future of the healthcare management is going to be like? What do you foresee from now, 5 years from now? Let's take it a shorter time or as 5 years. So how do you see it's going to improve?
Well, first, I think what you're doing today in science is going to be a game changer for how we start to think about everything related to our health. And you all see it already, right? In terms of those of us worried well who are constantly, checking our stats on ourselves, or now looking at, gosh, what have we learned about COVID and why is COVID affecting some people more than others? The entire country has just woken up to the field of genomics and proteomics and all the omics, right? That's more your territory than mine. But we're going to see, pharma's back in favor, and I shouldn't say everyone, that's not true, but science is starting to really be the definer of health. So I think that's going to be huge. And I think we'll see a lot more kind of personal sensor use and the like that will happen even through, our health planner, our health system, our provider. And I think this care in the home, virtual access, we're going to really work through in a big way over the next 5 years what can be virtual and what should not be virtual and why. We're not going to be anywhere near a complete definition, but I think we'll make a lot of headway on primary care and a lot of headway in some of these spaces that are big dollars, like musculoskeletal, big dollars. A lot of that can be done in the home with sensors and physical therapists online. So, thinking about that. And then the last one, and I know we need to go. I think we're going to see a whole new level. We've been talking about care teams for years. I think we'll see a whole new level of coaching that is coming from places that are different than our doctor, or we'll see a lot of practices, perhaps like a One Medical or a Maven or something else, that leverages the coaching model to really address what our needs are between visits. So I think we're going to start to see a more kind of continuous experience for those of us who are engaging in healthcare for our health. So there's so much more I could say on that topic, but those are sort of 3 vectors to be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And it was really a good session. Now I give it over to Doug.
Thank you so much, Julie, for taking the time today to talk with our students and our audience. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.